An ecosystem is a mix of living beings and non-living things. In science, we call non-living things abiotic. For example, rocks, temperature, and humidity. And then we have biotic, which is all living things like, for example, plants, mushrooms, animals, and microorganisms. Together, biotic and abiotic factors make living ecosystems that have many dynamics at play. A healthy ecosystem is usually rich in biodiversity. Biodiversity is the diversity of life that includes fungi, plants, animals, tiny little things that live in the soil, and the list goes on. When we have lots of species, it protects us from all kinds of changes and stresses to the environment. Let's say we have a really strong ecosystem with lots of biodiversity, many different plants, animals, and a rich soil full of life. Now let's imagine there's a sudden and intense drought in this region. Species that cannot adapt may be lost, but because we have so many different species with different traits, the ones who are resistant to the stress can survive. That means our ecosystem will not be completely wiped out. But if we don't have much diversity of species, the environment is unstable and can get really hurt from change. Imagine growing only one type of plant. What happens when that same drought hits? If that species can't survive the drought, we could lose all plant life. What does the ecosystem now look like? Will it be able to recover? No species is perfectly adapted to survive all possible change. And so, having a variety of species with different qualities makes an ecosystem much more resilient to change. This resiliency is a way we can measure how healthy an ecosystem is. When an ecosystem is resilient, it can endure more stress and keep functioning. So, what are these stresses that can affect the health of an ecosystem? There are too many to list, but here are a few examples. Storms, earthquakes, floods, fires, and droughts. Many of these happen naturally, but can also be caused or made worse by certain human impacts. And if the ecosystem isn't resilient and healthy, these external pressures can really damage it. Are agricultural spaces ecosystems? Humans changed the landscape to grow food and commodities. That field of corn wasn't always a field of corn. These fields used to be natural ecosystems, with all kinds of wild species and interactions. Like, for example, a forest and all the wildlife and plants that live there. Do you think the fields used for industrial agriculture are still ecosystems? Let's start with abiotic. We have things like climate, dirt, and humidity at play. What about biotic? The plants we grow are alive, but we are lacking a lot of diversity of life in plants, animals, mushrooms, and all kinds of important critters like the ones that we find in the soil. What we typically consider agriculture is industrial agriculture with monocrops. Monocrops are when we grow just one type of plant. We see this in crops like corn, wheat, mustard, canola, and soy. There are benefits to growing one plant in large amounts. Machinery is made to prep, plant, water, spray, pick, and process these crops rapidly and efficiently. But through this efficiency, what do we lose? When we don't cover the soil in between individual plants or in between crops, we get bare soil. Exposed soils lose water quickly and get very hot in the sun, which kills a lot of the soil life. It's also more likely to get affected by erosion, which is when soil blows away with the wind or gets washed away in water. When this happens, we lose the precious and nutritious top layer of soil that allows us to grow food. Using large machinery can crush down soil, which leaves the soil with less air. Tilling, which mixes the soil to make it easier to work, can also create compacted soil over time, which is crushed down soil. It's the opposite of what we wanted in the first place. Compacted soils can also cause a bunch of issues, like making it hard for plants to grow and even unbalancing soil life. First, it's a lot harder for plants to grow roots when the soil is so hard. Plus, there is now much less water and air in the soil, which the plant needs. When there isn't oxygen available, a lot of good soil life dies, while species that don't need oxygen take over. Unfortunately, usually the creatures that can survive in low oxygen are not the ones we want more of. And since a lot of the good soil life is dead, there is no one to balance out the bad stuff. And without soil life, plant life isn't likely. We know compacting soils, tilling soils, and leaving soils exposed can kill good soil life. But the story doesn't end there. Pesticides, fertilizers, and other agricultural chemicals can kill or hurt a lot of life forms, including our soil life, which is incredibly important to healthy plants and ecosystems. Pesticides can also kill more than just a pest species, and can also kill beneficial critters that keep this pest species in check. Before spraying, it's important to know what we are using and the impacts it can cause. We can cover our soils with mulch, plants, compost, and manure, which will help avoid erosion and compaction while feeding our soils. Healthy soil is great for the environment and also to create healthy food for us. Plants need water just like we do, but some need more than others. One example is that plants that are grown annually generally need more water than perennials. What does that mean? Annuals, so plants that grow in 1 year like most of our modern food crops, need more water than plants that live for many years, which are perennials, like for example an apple tree. Also, unhealthy soils can hold on to way less water than healthy soils. And so, planting perennials and tending to our soils can lower our need for water to grow food. The tilling of soils releases carbon into the air, which is unfortunate because having lots of carbon is great for the health of our soils. We also don't want to lose this carbon to the atmosphere as it contributes to climate change. So far, it is estimated we have lost from 50 to 70% of the carbon in our soils. But what if we did the opposite? If we limit tilling and we feed our soils, we can tap into something pretty amazing: carbon sinking. That means putting carbon into the soil, which is great for the soil and also for having less CO2 in the air. If we could increase organic matter by 1% worldwide on all agricultural soils, we could sink 256 billion tons of carbon. That is 3/4 of what we need to arrive at our 350 ppm carbon target. Keeping and building that carbon in the soil helps us, the environment, and the soil itself. When we grow just one crop, we lose the diversity of life that naturally happens in an environment. Have you ever seen one single thing grow for miles in nature? Probably not, because healthy habitats have biodiversity, which means many species that live together. All these species have interactions, which bring balance to the ecosystem. Native species and longer-lived species, like perennials, are also super important as they are naturally the most common species in nature. Unfortunately, they are not always considered in industrial agriculture. Native species are species that have lived in an area for a long time. These species evolved with other species from this region, creating important relationships and balance, like for example milkweed plants and their importance to monarch butterflies. When we plant only one species for large areas of land, if a pest finds this crop and likes it, there is nothing separating it from the next yummy crop. It's like a giant all-you-can-eat buffet with one massive amount of their favorite food. Disease can also travel more easily when we plant only one species. Finally, if one crop fails but we have many different types of food growing, something should work out. Meaning there's much less risk of losing all the harvest to disease or pests. Plus, we get a lot more food and nutrient diversity to meet our dietary needs. So even though we can consider industrial agricultural fields as a sort of ecosystem, it would be hard to consider them resilient. Any changes like floods, droughts, or climate change could break these unstable ecosystems. By creating unstable ecosystems, we are not only risking our ecosystems, but also our food sources. The good news is that we can do something about it and build up the strength of these habitats by observing nature and adapting our ways of growing food. What do we see in nature? And how can we mimic that in our gardens? If we take a step back and watch natural ecosystems, we can start understanding what is going on in our gardens. There isn't just one way to do things. There are so many ways to create great food while protecting and restoring ecosystems. Polyculture, permaculture, food forest, regenerative agriculture, silvopasture, there are a lot of options out there. It's also important to recognize the traditional knowledge involved in many of these methods. There's a lot of knowledge that comes from indigenous communities around the world that already practice a lot of these brilliant methods of growing food long before terms like permaculture were invented. So where do we start? Here are a few things to try or consider when it comes to growing food. Avoid or limit the use of large-scale machinery, tillers, pesticides, chemical fertilizers, and other chemicals that hurt ecosystems. Create walking pathways in the garden to avoid compacting soil where plants are growing. Cover soils with mulch and cover crops. Plant more native and perennial species. Prioritize biodiversity by planting many different species of plants. Leave some wild spaces untouched. Consider soil tests to understand your soil and its needs. Feed the soils with available nutrition like compost and manure. Upcycle materials when possible and create closed-loop systems. That means using what we already have and building systems that don't create waste in the first place. And as individuals, what can we do? When possible, we can buy local foods and products. Grow some of our own food and medicine. Get to know our local farmers and how they grow food. Explore and learn about different ways of growing food. Learn how to make, preserve, and store food and medicine. Limit food and material waste. Compost foods that we cannot use. Take part in community projects and gardening. Create and build community to share resources, skills, projects, spaces, and build a support system. Our planet faces many challenges, but there's a lot we can do. Together we can create beautiful, healthy spaces that bring food, safety, and community. Spaces where we can learn, share, and support each other. Want to learn more and try permaculture hands-on? We have a target to build 1 edible food forest in every ward of Sudbury. That means there is likely one near you already. These food forests mimic forest ecosystems, while providing us with food like apples, pears, sour cherries, raspberries, and a variety of herbs. We also have many projects to get involved in, from planting to maintenance to harvesting. We also have free workshops and learning sessions. Get in touch and find more info on our website at sudburysharedharvest.ca.